I have some questions. Please keep them coming. I'll check the iPad regularly. But I wanted to start with General Thompson and talking a little bit about the space enterprise vision, which I think to some of us outside of Space Command still seems a little bit nebulous. And if you haven't had one of those classified briefings that supposedly is great, it's hard to really put your finger on it. So I wanted to ask, I think of this as a planning document, a strategy vision for 2030 approximately. How is SSA incorporated into the space enterprise vision? Is it one of the pillars of it? How is it kind of interwoven in that vision?
Yeah, it is. Thanks, Mike. And you're exactly right. The space enterprise vision is exactly that. It's the vision of where we need to go from now until 2030. And it has many elements to it. And in fact, it is not just one high-level vision document and vision. It's actually a series of visions in which we take every single space mission area. You can talk about missile warning. You can talk about position, navigation, and timing. You can talk about satellite communications. You can talk about all of those areas. And we have taken the high-level vision and then broken it down into very detailed roadmaps and visions that follow. And one of those specific areas is space situational awareness. And it does in both in a high-level sense, but then ultimately at key points in times where a specific set of analyses, systems analyses, and decisions about systems that will come, training activities, organizational structures come. It lays out where key points in time where we believe key decisions will be made. In some cases, it deals with decisions like what is the follow-on to the space-based situational awareness system going to look like. There's a key point in that vision/roadmap that's the next level that says, at this point in time, an analysis is going to need to be conducted that says, what does the space-based element of our situational awareness plan look like, and how do we make the decisions there? As we make follow-on decisions about the ground-based elements, whether it's what comes after the space fence, how are we going to engage international and civil partners in gathering more information. As you unpeel that vision and look at every area, including specifically space situational awareness, we have laid out between now and 2025 specific analyses, decisions, and points at which we will execute the next element of where do we go next. So it is more detailed than just a high-level vision, and it does for every specific mission area, including space situational awareness, talk about where we're going next. And really probably for space situational awareness in our case, the next big decision is what will the follow-on system to the space-based situational awareness program look like.
So let's talk a little bit about that. That's been something that's been on the radar for a couple of years. There's been different ideas about, hey, it could be a hosted payload. The Air Force is open to that. I think originally it was talked about as a 3-ball constellation.
Right.
What's the thinking on it right now?
So,
and kind of the timeline for the decision.
So one of the things that is definitely General Hyten's vision, and we are trying to follow, in some cases more successfully than others, is trying to be less proscriptive in exactly what solution should look like and do a better job of describing requirements. And so in the case of the space-based situational awareness follow-on, General Hyten has basically said and had our team at Aerospace Headquarters define a set of requirements that might have multiple solutions. That's a little different than what we've done in the past. And so there are options that include perhaps a multi-spacecraft super synchronous set of spacecraft to survey the geosynchronous belt. There are concepts out there that are multi-spacecraft in low Earth orbit surveying the belt. There are concepts out there that are perhaps transiting the belt and observing. So at this point in time, there are still multiple concepts and options as long as they meet the minimum set of requirements. And he has also, by the way, provided a cost cap and said, here's how much I want to pay for this follow-on system.
What is it? Is it 150 million?
400.
400.
Yeah. This is the number that I want to spend. If you cannot give me all of the requirements I've asked for, I understand. Tell me the requirements you can't meet. the number one requirement is show me what you can meet for 400 million. Don't give me a solution that meets everything but bust the cost cap. And so those, right now we're in the process of collecting those concepts, interfacing with industry and others as we proceed to the next step, which would be select a couple of them for additional development.
Okay, and the whole constellation will be worked on with the ORS office, or maybe just that first set?
No guarantee. Yeah. They're again trying not to proscribe. If folks want to use architect or some of the elements that are in place, maybe it's developed by ORS, maybe it's not. Maybe some groups have their own concepts, have their own capabilities. They want to expand on some work they've already done. While we have a candidate government architecture to use to assess everything else, we're trying hard, unlike in the past, as to not pick and prescribe a solution, rather to open it up and allow for some of those competitive ideas and other aspects of competition to play out.
Sure. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the space policy debates that are going to be coming up related to space situational awareness. That we're getting to that time, the clock is ticking, where, hey, some of these policies need to be reset and rewritten. What are some of the debates that your office is looking at right now, specifically targeting SSA?
Sure. So we don't have any debates in the DoD, Mike. We all get along really well. We have discussions. Some of them are heated. There are several areas that we are dealing with, trying to work our way through right now. I think some of them are pretty obvious. A couple of them are actually in the magazine that I held up a little bit earlier. One of them is, how do we...
Thank you for reading.
Yeah, sure. How do we handle the classification issues of things that we can observe on orbit? It used to be when the U.S. owned and operated almost all of the observational capability on the planet to go ahead and track things in orbit, we could choose, if it was in our national security interest, to not go ahead and report on specific objects that we didn't want people to know were there. That time has long since passed, but our policies still have that in there. Now, it still may be that we in the DoD choose not to go ahead and report on all objects that we have up there for our own reasons. The bigger policy question is, what do we do about other people who can track them and can report on them? Do we have, and this doesn't become just a DoD problem and discussion, this becomes an interagency U.S. and in fact international discussion. How do we allow, do we restrict, are we allowed to restrict that kind of observation? I mentioned remote sensing licensing previously, and we have a series of laws in the United States that allows us to not allow people to image from space specific things on the ground. And those were all passed back as part of the Landsat Act of 1992 and follow-on acts since then, because of the national security implications of what you could see from space and what we perceive to be a national security risk. Well, the atmosphere is transparent in both directions. And so now we can see up and everybody else can see up. And the question is there a commensurate set of laws, rules, regulations, and restrictions in looking up as we develop looking down? Many folks within the DoD, I would say the time is long past which we could do that. It's too easy to look up. It's too easy to track in space to try to restrict that. But that is a policy change that we have to work through, because there are still, and I don't want to undersell them, there are national security concerns for tracking out some objects in space that we believe are important to go ahead and protect. And we have to figure out how, within this new dynamic of SSA, we apply appropriate protection, but recognize the fact that most objects can be tracked by most people most of the time.
And so what might the policy change look like?
You know, it's really a set of rules about how you publish things. It might be, we can publish where objects are, but not what they are, and not associate them. You know, and of course, as I said, some of these rules will end up being U.S. only rules as opposed to international rules. So I don't want to predict where the heated discussion will come out. I will tell you that's one of the things that we're dealing with is that question and how we work through it, because really in many of our minds that issue restricts us from doing the defensive space that we want to do more than it aids us in the national security structure that it was intended to protect. And so we don't have unanimity within the DoD on this yet, and that's our job in my office is to find how we can get to unanimity so we can publish new policies. So I don't want to predict for you because I really don't know where it will end up. But I think people can look at this problem and say, okay, the rules were established 30 years ago when things were one way. Things have changed. It's probably time for a new rule set. What's the right balance between protecting U.S. operations in space and making sure that we can, at the same time, recognize that these restrictions are doing less to protect us than if we would open it up and allow us actually to get all of the other data that's out there to do the defensive space operations work that General Thompson talked about.
I wanted to ask a little bit about the difference between the JIC-SPOC and the JSPOC, because in his testimony yesterday before the Senate Armed Services Committee, General Hyten seemed to lay this out maybe a little more clearly than I had heard in the past, saying he viewed the JSPOC as useful for fights on Earth, and maybe the JIC-SPOC aimed at fights in space. But I was hoping you could maybe delineate how you see those two operations center operating 5 to 10 years from now. What one does and what the other does.
I'd be glad to, and let me make it clear: we're still in the process of fleshing out exactly how that is going to work, but basically what we think and understand right now, and it is exactly as General Hyten said, is today and in the years past, the Joint Space Operations Center, that is an operational center today, has done it all and has grown up doing it all. And what it did in addition to SSA and those sorts of functions has had the opportunity over about 15 years, especially since 9/11, is focus on how we can ensure all the capabilities and effect that we deliver from space are integrated effectively and delivered effectively to joint forces operating at land and sea and in the air. That will have to continue. That's why we operate in space. Space for the sake of space gets us nowhere. And so the vision going forward is exactly that. The Joint Space Operations Center will continue with its operational ties to geographic combatant commanders, to national agencies, to civil and allied partners, to ensure that all the capabilities and effects that our systems provide are provided to those, from national leadership to the soldier on the battlefield to civil and allied partners and others, every single day across all possible operating conditions. They will continue that focus while the JIC-SPOC looks at what are the threats in the domain, what are the current coming threats in the domain, what are the things that we need to be able to do to be able to protect those assets and make sure they can continue to operate based on threats to those systems, either in the domain, from other domains, for example, like cyber, or from the surface of the Earth. And so the lash up and the seam between those two is the JIC-SPOC ensuring we take those actions that we need to continue to protect and defend and operate the systems without significant effect to their ability to provide the continued space effects to the warfighter. And so that would be the seam that we have to lash up between the JIC-SPOC and the JSPOC, is to do what we need to in the JIC-SPOC to protect and defend capabilities without disrupting their provision of those capabilities to the joint fighter.
And I think part of what goes along with that too is the joint mission system, or the JSPOC mission system.
Right.
Obviously that program's a little bit behind right now. I think 19 months was the last I'd heard. What's the status of that, and what's kind of the status of that next increment, increment 3, which is the BMC 2 that you've talked about? How should we think of that? Will that be something that's at the JIC-SPOC and the JSPOC, or conceptually, I've heard it's more of an idea than an actual hardware software package?
So the current
I
increment.
should ask too if you can explain a little bit about what that, maybe some people don't know exactly what that is.
Okay, okay. Yeah, so the JSPOC mission system, JMS as it's known, right now it's focused on what we call increment 2. And as much as, commercials or movies or others would hope to portray, in fact, in terms of the systems and the tools and the processes we use today in the Air Force for space situational awareness, they're frankly antiquated. The algorithms, the hardware, the things that we're using were basically designed, developed, and used starting in the 1960s up through the 1980s and early 90s. And right now, what the JSPOC mission system is doing is two things. First of all, it's taking those algorithms and processes and things that we use for routine space situational awareness today and rehosting it on modern hardware and with modern software and with modern equipment. So that's what's going on right now, in addition to identifying and procuring advanced tools and things we think we'll need in the future, but that's intended for a future element of the JMS. So the focus today is really to take the processes that are foundational to SSA today and make sure that they're on modern IT systems. The next phase, and the next phase for the JMS, which is really increment 3, we have really re-envisioned over the last year, even as we've done the experimentation with the JSPOC. And it is now really going to be much more focused on battle management, command and control that we truly need, not as a one gigantic monolithic system that we're going to acquire all at once, but part of what the JSPOC has left behind now is both from an IT sense, from a tool sense, and from an operational sense, a rapid prototyping and experimentation section from which we can perform experiments, we can perform exercises, we can run war games and other things, determine both the types of tools that exist today that we might immediately turn around and spin into a battle management command and control system, or the needs that we have so that we can go out very specifically. And so, as opposed to what JMS Increment 3 was envisioned in the past, which was one large, identify all the requirements you need, all the gaps in the seams, create one large program, develop it, and deliver it, we've now broken it out into a smaller series based on near real-time experimentation and exercises, identifying tools and capabilities in a smaller sense that we can very quickly develop and roll into that PMC2 system. So it's a revision.
Do we see some of those systems or capabilities put into the JSPOC?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
How quickly?
It's the focus, while the focus is really on defend and protect, anything that we could use in the JSPOC we would roll in as well. And not just there, but also the 18th Space Control Squadron that's going to do that tactical SSA mission that would feed both the JSPOC and the JSPOC, those as well. And right now we're in the process of, you're right, we still have months to go to finish out the current increment 2 activities for JMS. But in parallel, while we're finishing out those activities, starting now, we're finishing to build the environment so that here about October 1st, we can begin the rapid prototyping. And if a tool is ready, if we have a tool, it's available, it's ready to go, we believe it's operationalized to the extent it needs to be, we can roll it immediately into either the JSPOC or the JSPOC. So it could happen from one day to the next, or if you're going to identify new tools, new capabilities, or more work that has to be done on a prototype tool, we want to be able to turn those on what I'll call modern IT timelines, not old traditional DoD procurement timelines, so very rapidly.
I wanted to ask about international partnerships, because we hear over and over again that this is a key asset and a key pillar of the U.S. government's SSA efforts. But there's also criticism that some of these international assets are being underutilized. And so how do you better incorporate, have a better relationship there, and I guess kind of balance that tug of war that says in some part, hey, we need to be able to do everything ourselves, and we also need to if we don't work with our allies, it's not going to be a successful effort.
Sure. No, Mike, that's a great question. It actually circles back to the first question you asked me in the policy discussion about classification. So So first of all, we need to recognize that this need to work internationally really has been part of our national policy for space since at least President Obama published his National Space Policy in 2010, and it's been picked up again and again in all of the strategies that we've seen come forward, including General Hyten's Space Enterprise Vision that he published last year. International partnerships is key to it. I should say right at the outset that goes much further than just SSA activities. I mean, that goes in every element of space capability we talk about, whether it's PNT or weather or even some of the needs to protect and defend the environment. That international flavor will subtend them all. But on the SSA in particular, so and again, I want to go ahead and point to the excellent article that Brian wrote on this in this version of the magazine, because I think it really does provide a great view of this. Number one, we have to figure out how we deal with this classification issue, which has been a U.S. owned and operated classification system for many years, even as the rest of the world has been observing these satellites and has been tracking these satellites. We know that to be a fact, but still we instrument our policies and we execute our policies in such a way that we still create those walls, and those walls are preventing us from really bringing the international partners in as thoroughly as we'd like to. That's to our, again, that is to our own risk by doing that, and that's why I say this balance of national security. The benefit of knocking down those rules is probably greater than the benefit of keeping those rules erected. It's not just classification, though. We don't have published standards on how to bring SSA data in. We don't have clear guidelines on how accurate the information needs to be, what the verification needs to occur on that data. How do we go ahead and create algorithms that can create trust by comparing different observations? When you own your own system, when you only have one watch, you don't need to figure out a way to know what time it is. All you do is look at your watch. When you have 100 watches, you need to figure out the voting schema to figure out what the right time is. By the way, the one watch you should use is GPS. I'll just say that as a the USNO guys will probably get upset with me if I say that. But the fact of the matter is that when you have many people doing SSA with different standards, different propagation algorithms, different data collection methods, if you don't standardize those and publish a standard that people can use, it becomes very difficult to ingest all of that data. It becomes more anarchy than anything else. So we didn't have that problem before. We have that problem now. JMS and some of the things that have been done associated with JMS, such as the non-traditional data processor that was put in place several years ago, starts to get at that problem. We also need to figure out what do we want to do with all this data. How do we want to share it? How do we want to broadcast it out? How do we want to go ahead and divide up the problem? General Thompson talked about the 18th squadron that he was setting up at JSPOC. That was a great move just in and of itself, because now it reduces the level of organization necessary to go ahead and have the discussion with other organizations around the world about this SSA monitoring problem, especially those first 3 layers of the diagram that he showed you in terms of what we can share. Those things should be thoroughly shareable, and those should be shareable at the working level with operational organizations that are focused only on that problem. So it's changing the organization of how we do things and working with our allies to recognize how their organizations interact with ours. That's a key part of this. And quite frankly, the last part of it is to go ahead and recognize that we can't build all the sensors. We need to work with our allies to figure out what sensors should they build, what sensors should we build, how should we share those sensors. You talked to General Hyten or to General Thompson about General Hyten's view of the SBSS follow-on, as we want to spend $450 million. Canada has money to spend as well. So we may still only spend $450 million, but we may create an $800 million system if we went ahead and did that jointly with Canada. That might be the system we want. So it's a matter of figuring out internationally how we go ahead and create shared capability we can then all use. Those are just some of the problems that we need to get at to improve that.
Are there experiments going on right now, or are there efforts to kind of bring those walls down? If there's
There
folks
are.
here, they're saying, hey, when am I going to see a difference? Is
Right.
it going to be 3 months, 6 months, 2 years, 5 years down the road?
There are efforts. Let me tell you, we created what was called the Combined Space Operations Initiative, CSPO initiative, back in 2012 with our 4 closest allies, and that has already created a huge increase in collaboration. You can look at things like the Phobos-Grunt deorbit several years ago. I'm sure the deorbit that we're going to be dealing with over the next couple of months with the Chinese space station. That is a true collaborative effort that we saw operating. But more to the point of observations, the Canadian Sapphire satellite, which was launched independently of a U.S. plan to ingest it, now is just as much a contributor to our SSA picture as our own SBSSs. And so those kind of things are happening. I'm very glad to see how well they're happening at every level of organization, and I think we've got still a lot of ways to go, but we are on the right road. So,
Great. Do we have time for a couple more questions?
Time has come. I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here
Time
with
for
the
coffee.
book.
All right.
I want to thank all of you for providing some good answers to Mike's questions. And again, I know you'll be around should others have some questions for you before you depart. So thank you very much.